Good evening and welcome to the Reproaction Monthly Act and Learn webinar for June 22nd, 2017. Tonight's topic is going to be super awesome. We're doing a training and it is awesome communications for organizers. So first, we'll just introduce your host. The first host you hear is myself, Erin Matson. I'm based in Arlington, Virginia, and I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of Reproaction.
And I am Pamela Merritt, and I am based in St. Louis, Missouri, and I am the other co-founder and co-director of Reproaction. So the agenda for tonight is as follows. We're going to give an introduction of who Reproaction is for folks who are new to the webinars. And then we're going to go into awesome communications for organizers. We're going to go through strategy, building a plan for the day of an action, advisories and press releases, social media, interviews, and then we're going to go into some next steps. And after that, we'll have a Q&A section. So for the Q&A, if you do have questions throughout the webinar, just drop them on your GoToWebinar control panel. There's a tab for questions. If you drop them in there, we will answer them at the end of the webinar. The hashtag for live tweeting is Reproaction. So Reproaction is a new direct action group forming to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We are proud of our left flank analysis. We are extremely proud of our willingness to hold folks on all sides accountable, be they allies or the opposition, and we are committed to nonviolent direct action. So next up is Erin with some strategy.
Yep, all right. So first of all, really excited to talk about strategy. And so we do a number of trainings with Reproaction. You can go back and on our website and look for, we do a direct action training and an advocacy training within our modules. And one of the things that we talk about is strategy. You should always have strategy before you start an action. And so communications should be an important part of your strategy from the get-go. And so I'm starting here with this photograph. What you can see is a group of activists from Reproaction, and what we did was we confronted Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia on the street after he met with David Daleiden, who was the head of the Center for Medical Progress. David Daleiden produced the fraudulent sting videos against Planned Parenthood that led to 15 felony charges against himself and his co-conspirator, and that also supported anti-abortion terrorism. The shooter at the Colorado Springs Planned Parenthood cited and quoted Daleiden's work after he was apprehended by law enforcement. So I'm going to use that as a backdrop to this action that we did targeting Senator Manchin, where we hand-delivered a letter to him on the street and demanded accountability from him as a backdrop to some of these concepts. So building a communication strategy is first for a reason. And so first you've got to take a step back and ask about your bigger strategy. What is the outcome you are organizing to achieve? So with the Manchin action, what we wanted was a firm commitment that this idea of a so-called big tent on abortion, and what that is some people on the left, including Senator Manchin, but including people who are considered much more progressive than Senator Manchin, have been suggesting that abortion should be an optional part of what it means to be a progressive. And with Senator Manchin in particular, while he's not a progressive, he is a Democrat, and it's unacceptable and begs the question, you know, is pro-life terrorism welcome in the Big Tent? So the outcome that we were organizing to achieve on that specific action was we wanted a clear denunciation of pro-life terrorism and making it clear that that's not in the Big Tent. The larger outcome at Reproaction is that we are working to ensure that abortion has a permanent seat at the progressive table. So you've got to, in your communication strategy, think about what's the ask. You have to very clearly be able to say what it is you're looking for. And in Senator Manchin's case, we wanted him to apologize for meeting with David Daleiden. We wanted him to say very clearly that that he draws the line at anti-abortion terrorism, and to make clear that we don't meet with anti-abortion terrorists, that we don't think that anti-abortion terrorism is a point of view in the public policy square. And so specifically, one of the things you want to do, once you know what your ask is, you need to know what reporters or news outlets are that cover your issues. So in this case, I've been working for some time with a number of reporters on this issue of the left selling out on abortion. And so I knew that those were my natural reporters that I wanted to focus on and news outlets. But I also knew that there was a broader audience as well, people who are interested in the politics surrounding access to reproductive health care, as well as people who cover West Virginia news. So in your strategy, make sure, do you have an updated press list? This is really important. You want to do this before it's action day. Take a review of your issues that you're working on and figure out who at the publication most frequently covers those issues. Get their email addresses, organize them in your press list, and then make very clear who you should be reaching out to on your issue. So ask yourself, in terms of your action, is this a local, state, or national issue? Because, and in some cases, it can be multiple. It could be a state issue and a national issue, or it could just be a state issue. So be sure to answer that question and tailor your coverage that way. I live in Arlington, Virginia. A number of things that work that I do might be a national issue and be part of the National Bureau or the front page editors for the Washington Post. But then there's also a great deal of work that I do that covers state and local politics, where actually the best people on the beat are folks that you can find in the metro or local and state sections, right? So be sure that you know who you're targeting. Okay, also, when you're building your communication strategy, think about, is there an opposition, and what are they likely to say about your action? So you want to always be 3 steps ahead of your opposition and be ready to respond to their most likely charges. You don't want to necessarily invite their perspective into the square when you're speaking with reporters, but at the same time, you want to have an easy answer in your pocket into what they're likely to say. So, for example, back on that action we were doing with Senator Manchin, one of the things that folks are likely to say is thinking about opposition and what they're likely to say from the right, from people who oppose abortion rights, that, oh, you're just censoring speech, why can't people meet with someone? And in that case, an easy answer to have in your back pocket is, well, this is about drawing the line at terrorism, and there are certain people whose views really shouldn't be held in the public sphere, especially people who are inciting others to violence, right? But then also know that you may have multiple layers of opposition. I mean, frankly, one of the sad truths that we have right now as reproductive justice advocates is that some of our opposition is actually people like Nancy Pelosi, who's recently thrown abortion under the bus. And what Nancy Pelosi has been saying is that we need a big tent on abortion. We need to make sure that there's room for everyone, regardless of their views on abortion. And again, having a clear response that this is the time to stand up strong for reproductive health rights and justice, and just be ready to respond to that. So what you want to do is plan to communicate a win, a draw, and a loss, right? So think about your action that you're organizing and plan to communicate for when you win, right? But then you also want to make a plan for when you have a draw, or when it's more or less like a stalemate, or there's no clear victory. But then also make a plan for communication when there's a loss. And so oftentimes before a big event, for example, we had at least 3 different press releases and graphics and slates of tweets ready before the Whole Woman's Health decision last year. The Whole Woman's Health Supreme Court case, the biggest abortion access case in a generation, where the Supreme Court thankfully ruled extremely favorably, and we were able to use our win communications, but we also had templated press releases and social media and images ready for if it was a mixed verdict, right? And we actually had sections highlighted that we would swap out depending on what the particulars were. And then we also had a lost version ready. So you want to be ready. There are going to be times in issues that you're organizing around that you know that a big decision is coming, and so you want to be ready to communicate regardless. And with that, I will pass it to Pamela.
Thank you very much. So next up, let's talk about building a day of plan for communications. The picture you're looking at here is from a very recent action that we did in Missouri, where we delivered petitions to Governor Greitens, the governor of Missouri's office, in partnership with our friends at NARAL Pro-Choice Missouri, who were also collecting petitions about CPCs. Our specific ask was that the governor investigate the use of tax credits and the rerouting of federal TANF funds, which were designed to alleviate hunger, to CPCs. Some $4.3 million went from a fund that was supposed to alleviate hunger to fake clinics that are anti-abortion propaganda machines and shame women. And our specific campaign highlighted the fact that the governor has taken no action on infant and maternal mortality rates, which are horrific in the state of Missouri. So why are we taking money to go to fake clinics when we should be prioritizing infant and maternal mortality? So we had a plan and we were able to execute it, including reaching out to the press ahead of time, doing interviews on the ground, what the visual was going to look like, and then how we communicated that actually during the action. Building a plan is actually a really comforting thing to do. If communications is new to you, once you start listing out all of the different things you need to do, you're gonna find that, at least for me, it takes away from some of the stress of making sure that I hit all of the points and that we are able to cover all of our bases as we communicate about an action. The reason we want to communicate our actions is because we're doing them to educate the broader public and to apply pressure to whoever we're taking action against. So pressure doesn't happen in the dark. Pressure requires the light of attention and public attention. So you definitely want to have a plan and communicate effectively. The first thing that we recommend is that you do an event advisory. You don't do this if you're doing a surprise action. This is for an action that you actually aren't trying to do, like surprising somebody or catching people unprepared. But for the bulk of direct actions, as you're organizing and recruiting for them, it is in the public, so you want to go ahead and do an event advisory. The advisory, which we're going to go through the specifics of what it should contain, but the event advisory should go out 24 hours prior to the event. It has the basics, the who, what, when, where, and why of your action. And you send it out via email to an email list of select media that cover your turf, be it local, state, or national. So you need to determine exactly who needs to hear about this event advisory, who's going to cover it and be able to get it out to the target universe you want to know about your event. So 24 hours prior to the event, you're going to launch that out via email. You always put the email addresses of the press in a blind CC. You don't want to put it in the regular CC of your email. And you copy and paste everything. Do not send out attachments. Reporters hate it. And just think about it in terms of how most people receive emails on their smartphones. So you want them to be able to open that email up and immediately see your who, when, where, and why. And then you want to send the advisory out again the morning of the event. Most media outlets don't make their decision about what they're going to cover until the morning of. And even then, it can all be thrown into chaos if there's breaking news in their turf. But you want to be the most recent event advisory that your media target sees. So you send it 24 hours prior to the event, and then you send it again the morning of the event. If you have time, I highly recommend that you make follow-up phone calls to those press outlets. And you can prioritize the press outlets you really, really want to show up. But your basically calling to say, I just sent an advisory, give them the elevator speech. We're showing up at Governor Greitens to demand accountability on funding for fake clinics. We're going to be delivering petitions and a visibility display outside of his office, and then ask them if they're going to attend. You want to make note of any press that say they're going to attend, because whoever your point person is to wrangle press, they need to know who said they're going to show up. And then you also want to have the press release done prior to the event. So while you're writing the event advisory, my little tip is to write the event advisory and then just write the press release at the same time, because it's going to be a fuller version of the advisory. The event advisory is hyper-focused on who, what, when, where, and why. Your press release should give more information about why you're taking action, but you want to have it done so that it's ready to launch once your event is done, and more importantly, so you can bring copies to the event. If press show up on site, you want to give them a printed copy of the press release, just in case they're about to go to their car, grab a sandwich, and write an article. And believe it or not, I've seen that happen. You want to send it out, as I said, immediately following the event. We're not, in this current age, stuck to the kind of rigid media publishing deadlines that existed 10 years ago, but you still want to give the press the information that you want them to report as quickly, efficiently, and accurately as possible, because that means you increase the likelihood that they're actually going to do the article. You want to identify key members of the press and influential social media folks to give a heads up to. So when you're thinking of the event advisory, you want to go ahead and say to powerful, if you're doing an environmental justice activist, identify who is really big on that issue and has a large following in your turf, in your local city or nationally, and send them a message if you have their email, or a direct message on Twitter. Don't send it as a general message. You want to communicate with them in a way that shows, you don't want to publicly communicate this heads up, but go ahead and give them a nudge and say, hey, we're taking action and I just wanted to let you know. When you're reaching out to the press, and this can be before you even send the event advisory, once you've determined that you're taking action, if there's key members of the press who cover your issue, it is perfectly acceptable for you to pick up the phone and give them a heads up, or even shoot them an email and say, hey, I'm just wanted to prioritize this in your life. And I've noticed that people who really cover specific issues like reproductive health or social justice, racial justice, really do appreciate getting that heads up. They have a lot of information flying at them. And so any way that you can assist them and help them prioritize their work is a good thing. You want to identify who is going to talk to the press and make sure that they actually talk to the press. This is both the people who are attending, who might be speaking at your action, the people who are impacted by the oppression. You want to have them prepped so that they are comfortable. You might even want to practice with them what they're going to say, and you want to make sure that they are connected with the press. So whoever is wrangling press the day of your action, and that should be somebody who's identified within your plan, you want to make sure that they know that Erin is going to be there for the first 30 minutes, and she's prepared to talk about why meeting with pro-life terrorists is a bad idea. Be as specific as possible about what they're comfortable talking about, and make sure that they're comfortable with how they communicate with the press. If somebody is completely uncomfortable, you don't want to stick them in front of a reporter and put them in an awkward position. This also applies within your organization and within the activists who you're recruiting. We all know that one activist who's amazing and totally down with the cause, but who has a tendency to go off message. And even though that's perfectly acceptable when you're at a coffee house and you're talking about what's wrong with Trump's America, but when you're actually at an action, you want to make sure that you're not putting people who might take it off message in front of the press. You want to ensure that the key takeaways that you're working really hard for and that you've organized an action for are all that's in front of a reporter. You also want to identify who will post to official social media platforms. And it's a good idea to identify who within your within the activists you recruited has a prominent social media presence so that you can go ahead and have those people queued up, or the person who's handling social media has those people queued up and knows that they're going to be tweeting. Things move really, really fast on social. So you want to make sure that you have as much things lined up as possible so that the action looks as full and vibrant and energetic as it actually is. It should appear that way on social as it does offline. And then you want to plan for the opposition on the ground or on social media. So within reproductive justice work, a day doesn't go by when we do not have the opposition dropping into a social media platform or a hashtag. But go ahead and plan for that. What are you going to respond? Are you not going to respond? You want to tell your activists whether to or not to respond, because that can actually distract from the messaging and from the key takeaways of your action. So you don't want the story to be about a big dust up or a bunch of mixed messaging. You want to control the story. You want to also stage the visual. And I don't mean that by faking the legitimacy of your action, but think through what the action is going to look like from a member of the press. Think through, like, one of the big no-nos that I learned early is that if you have people speaking at a podium, you don't want all of the activists to be in the audience looking at them, because then every picture is just going to be of the one person talking and it doesn't look like a lot of people showed up. And you've worked hard to recruit a ton of people, so make sure that you have activists behind speakers so that the visual that a reporter or a photojournalist will get will be of that full attendance that you've worked really hard to recruit for. Think about how to present your visuals. Think about what it's going to look like. One of the big issues that we encountered when we went to Governor Greitens' office is that the Missouri legislature is very dimly lit, which is freakishly accurate for the atmosphere of what goes on in that building, but the lighting is very poor. So we opted to go ahead with the action of taping the petitions up on the wall, but we knew that we were going to get some dimly lit pictures, so we tried to accommodate as much as possible for that poor lighting.
All right, great. Well, now I'm going to talk a little more in depth about advisories and press releases. So let's go. Okay, so for your event advisories, you want them to be engaging and brief, okay? This is not where you're getting in all of your facts and all of your stats. The whole point of an event advisory is you're trying to get the press to show up. So you want it to be clear who is coming, what the event is, what time it is, who they can expect to be there, right, in terms of supporters, and what your ask is. So engaging and brief, clear in your subject line. Again, as Pamela said, so important. Not as an attachment. This goes right in the body of an email. Okay, but sometimes you don't send an advisory for a surprise action. So that action I shared with you earlier when we went and confronted Senator Joe Manchin about his meeting with David Daleiden, specifically, that was a surprise action. So we did not send an advisory in advance. So know that some actions will be like that, others will not. So one thing to be careful of, I said before, talk about who might be there, say activists, but don't guarantee turnout numbers or crowd size. I've had this go poorly before for an action I attended but did not organize, where the people who were organizing it put out an event advisory making it sound like there would be a huge crowd outside the Capitol, specifically focused on some of the bills that were being blocked by conservatives in Congress. And in fact, it was just a handful of us there, and I watched the organizer actually get yelled at by a cameraman who showed up and said, "You told us there was going to be a huge rally here and there's 5 people. So don't overestimate. Something doesn't have to be a huge crowd to be impactful, but don't inflate a huge crowd. If you do not know that you're going to get a lot of people, don't claim that you will. And in fact, it's better to over-deliver rather than over-promise. I recall before the women's marches took place this year, one of the things that was very clear the right wing was trying to do was to minimize it. And one of the strategies that I saw actually when I was on a panel on television with the founder of Women for Trump, what she was trying to do was scale to unrealistic expectations. So she said, you know, if it's anything short of, I forget the number she said, but like 500,000 people, then it's a total failure. If it's not as big as the March for Life, it's a total failure. And she was inflating the numbers that no one was saying because essentially she wanted it to look like a failure. Of course, she was wrong. It was a huge demonstration. The streets were choked. You couldn't even march, and millions of people around the world. But the point is that you can make your event look really bad if you overpromise. So don't guarantee your turnout numbers or crowd size. And then be sure to send that to your entire press list of folks who may be interested in this. It can be a great idea. You're going to do it in the body of the email. Depending on if you have a personal relationship with a reporter, you might want to put a little note on top. You know, just following up from our discussion last week, thought you'd be interested to know that we're heading out for an action tomorrow morning. Okay, so here's an example of an event advisory. So this is pretty simple stuff. So at the top, put for immediate release. You'll want to include your date, and then your media contact, and name, phone number, and email address. Make sure that this is a person who actually answers their phone or email, who stays on top of it, because press cycles are very quick. And if they don't get an answer to a question they might have about this event, chances are good they won't cover it. Okay, so you want to make sure you have a catchy title and a very brief description. So it should be a catchy title, but also a descriptive title. And then you want to have a 1-paragraph description of what the event is, and then just block it out in bullet points, just like this. Who's participating? What is the action? When? What date and time will it take place? Where? And make sure you include not just the location, but the address. So don't just say, you know, U.S. Supreme Court steps, the U.S. Supreme Court steps, Constitution and First Avenue Northeast, Washington, D.C. And describe the visuals, right? So that, you know, you can say that you expect a picket outside the Supreme Court steps, right? And then in additional information, make sure that you have a 1-paragraph description at top. If you want to include more than 1 paragraph, put it down below. And then again, just for questions, please contact name, at phone number, or email address. And that's a style thing at the bottom, the 3 numbers, # centered, is a way to indicate that an advisory or release is done. And then for press releases, so a press release is something, regardless of whether it's a prize action or not, you want to have your press release written in advance, and you want to write it as if it may be printed word for word. And if you're lucky, and this has happened many times both to myself and my co-conspirator on this call, if you're lucky, and in particular with local press, you may find that part of your press release, or all of it, is printed word for word. As newspaper consolidations happen, as newsrooms get smaller and smaller, if you have good content, some places will just put it right up. So you want to make sure that your writing is clear, that it is concise, that it clearly encapsulates what problem you're working on and what your proposed solution is and what your demand is, right? Include data and information to back up your call to action. So give them a couple statistics or quotes. You want to be a purveyor of information, right? Not just opinion, but information, that news that they can use. Make sure to include quotes from participants and your leadership in the rally, and send this to your entire press list. And I want to go back a bit to the mansion event that I was talking about earlier. So a couple things that I did with my press release. First of all, I printed up 10 copies of the press release, and I had it on my person the entire time, so that if someone did ask what we were doing, I could quickly hand them the press release and say, this is what's going on. And the press release also included, I also printed several copies of the letter that we were delivering Mansion. So again, if someone was covering it and there was that opportunity, we could whip it to them right there. But then the other thing that you want to do is make sure, especially in the case of a surprise action, like the one that we did with Mansion, I actually had that press release geared up in my phone. I had all of the people that I wanted to send it to. I had it in draft format, and I had it ready to press send the moment that the action was complete. Of course, the action was exciting in that we actually bumped into him on the street and were able to live stream a conversation with him for about 7.5 minutes, in which he was given an opportunity to denounce anti-abortion terrorism and failed to do so. So was able to quickly update the press release in my phone. Again, that's another reason why it's so important to have it in the body of the email and not an attachment, so that you can easily edit it. And then be sure to send the press release to your entire press list after your event has taken place. And again, you can include photos with that. Again, sometimes that may be, just as your press release content may be printed word for word, your photos may be used as well. And so with that follow-up, you know, if you've done a good job, most likely you may get a chance to speak to someone in follow-up who may interview you and may include both part of your press release and then part of an interview after the action has taken place, which is what happened with the Mansion action. So, so again, just an example of how this all plays out with a press release. So again, for immediate release at the top of the date, your contact, again, name, phone number, and email address of a person who actually answers. Make sure that you have your descriptive headline, and then below it, you'll see in italics, there's, you know, a little more information about it. Make sure that you do journalism style, so you do the city and state. Your first paragraph, you want to clearly outline the issue. What I love about this press release is it just puts the quote right in bold and makes it so easy for the press to see the quote that you most want them to take in. And another thing about the quotes that you put in press releases, what's beautiful about this is it clearly defines the problem. It's a sham committee, baseless attack that wasted valuable time. And who did it hurt? Missourians by holding the bill for more than $156,000 in legal fees. So right there, that is a quote that is descriptive. It is interesting. It clearly frames the problem and makes it easy that that you can't be taken out of context. Again, you'll see later in it, there's links that corroborate facts and statistics and information. And then at the bottom, you'll also see there's a quick line of Reproaction is a new direct action group forming increased access to abortion and advanced reproductive justice. So again, at the end of your press release, you can summarize who your group is that is organizing. And with that, I will pass it to Pamela for social media.
Thank you very much, Erin. So social media, yay. This is one of my favorite tools to communicate on, even though sometimes it can also stress me out because there's so much information coming through. So I am a Twitter person, and I know a lot of people are on Instagram. Some people are more comfortable with Facebook. But the reality is that the press and a lot of influential people are on Twitter. So you want to make sure that you're prioritizing that particular platform when you're doing direct actions, because they've decided that that's where they can efficiently find out what's going on. So when you make your plan, you've got your day of plan, also have a very detailed social media plan. So what is the purpose of the action? Who is impacted by the oppression? What emotions or emotion do you want to inspire? And do we want to engage opposition? Specific to social media. So the purpose of the action matters because as somebody who is on Twitter all the time, @SharkFu, what I regularly see is people who go out and organize amazing actions where they are directly using nonviolent direct action to spark a response. And then they have a bunch of tweets that complain about the response, but don't talk about the purpose of the action. A great example of that is when you see people who are sending 100 tweets on a hashtag about people getting arrested, but there's very little about why they took direct action and put their bodies on the line to risk arrest. You don't want to talk about the arrest if the purpose is to get information out about police brutality, or what we're seeing currently today, this brilliant action that's taking place in DC by ADAPT and activists, disability activists, who are, if you can check it out, the Adapt and Resist hashtag. It's an amazing action. It's being very well documented on social media, but they're really stressing what the purpose is. Why are there disability activists putting their bodies on the line and risking arrest right now? And it's very clear if you follow that hashtag why. They're documenting the arrests to draw attention to why they're there. Who is impacted by the oppression? You want that front and center. If you're an organizer and you're not, and you should definitely have the people you've organized out in front on social media. If you're taking pictures, you want to be about them. There should be very little social media posts on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter about if you're the organizer. The Facebook, the communication should be about who is impacted by the oppression. And what emotions do you want to inspire? You want people, what happened when I got on Twitter and was taking my lunch break and I saw this Adapt and Resist action and I looked at the hashtag, I was absolutely horrified by the way that activists were not being listened to, were being mistreated, that these are people whose lives are at risk because of Medicaid cuts, and all of that came through very clear. I'm pretty sure that's the emotion they were shooting for, and they hit it out of the park with this action and with the way it was translated on social media. Another good example of having a really good social media plan is the Black Lives Matter protest that took place at Netroots Nation a couple of years back in Phoenix, which was, again, a surprise action, but it was so tight and the social media was very clear and the messaging was very clear that the emotion of frustration was something that literally came through in tweets, and that ain't easy to do in 140 characters. And do you want to engage the opposition? You do not want to distract from the purpose, but every now and then it is good to lift up a particularly horrible, cruel and emotionless opposition tweet and go ahead and quote tweet it and drop in your message. So when they're saying, get a job, that's a perfect opportunity to say that you can't work and receive Medicaid in Missouri because you have to make less than $4,000 a year to qualify. Every now and then it's good to do that, but have a very clear understanding of how you want to engage the opposition, or if you do, on social. You want to follow way ahead of time. As soon as this webinar is over, if you're not already doing this, follow all of the reporters you can who cover your issue, who are in your turf, if it's local, state, or national. Follow the media outlets and follow people who are influential on social media within your issue. So the more people you follow, the more you get a feel for what they cover, what they are interested in. There's so much more personality coming through on social media, particularly Twitter, than comes through in an article. So you get an idea for who they are. You might even retweet some of their work if it's interesting. You don't have to do it to kiss up to them. And it's actually a great way to build relationships. So I have a lot of relationships with reporters that I've built up simply over the years because we follow each other on social media. And when they get a press release or an event advisory from me, they can connect it to this person that they know who's an activist. And the same thing goes with influential people. Hashtags matter. So you want to, I've seen organizations agonize about hashtags. If you're but it shouldn't be painful. So if you're doing state organizing and it is electorally focused, if it's legislatively focused, then odds are your state has a state ledge hashtag. In Missouri, it's MoLedge. In Kansas, it's KSLedge. So that's the most important hashtag if you're doing stuff that you want reporters and activists and politicians to know about that affects a legislative session. There's usually a version of that for most of the work that's happening, for example, in cities or also federally. There's currently hashtags that are going on around the work that's going on to resist Trump. So if you're working on Medicaid, Medicaid's a way more important hashtag than coming up with something nifty and clever just for you. Keep in mind, you're limited to 140 characters, so you don't want to waste space. The purpose of the hashtag is to push your message and your action out to a broader audience. So really do some deep thinking in what the hashtags are for your issue, for your turf, and make a determination if it makes sense to have a unique hashtag for your campaign or for your action. That's great. But prioritize the hashtags that will actually amplify your messages over a unique and clever hashtag. Do not tag reporters in tweets. I see a lot of people do this, and I know that there are probably some reporters who are like, I don't mind, but if I had $1 for every reporter who was like, oh my God, I can't stand it when people do that, I'd be rich. So it for whatever reason, it doesn't annoy me, but I hear a lot about how that annoys reporters. If you really want to get it in front of them, think about those influential or high volume hashtags about your issue or about the environment, be it legislature or be it within a social justice environment that you're working on. It is perfectly okay to communicate via direct message, but you don't want to drag that stuff out either. Don't share every single thing because then you're going to be the person they ignore. When you do share it, make sure that you're understanding that you don't want to stalk, for lack of a better word, a reporter. They're not going to respond with coverage. Pictures tell the story. So you want to have pictures, you want to have live video, you want to be able to convey exactly what's going on. I'll go back again to Black Lives Matter, which has some awesome documentation of their actions, and with video and with pictures, it really drove home as a St. Louisan, drove home what was going on in Ferguson and in St. Louis after the murder of Michael Brown. People were able to experience that in a very real way because you had activists who were using hashtags and pictures and live video. The one thing I will say to caution on live video is that you want to make sure that you have a tight action. You don't want to accidentally capture something on video that can be used against you or the activists that you've recruited, should law enforcement stumble on it, because law enforcement does tend to also hover on those hashtags. And then Storify is a nifty tool. I really do like the ability to capture some of the great commentary and great social media messaging that happens with actions for future use. You can send it out to your supporters so they can see exactly what people were saying. A lot of people aren't on Twitter. So even though the press has decided that it's an awesome and efficient way to find out about breaking news and to share it, Twitter is not the world. So you want to make sure that you're communicating about your actions with your supporters, and it's a really neat way to capture that information for people who aren't sitting on Twitter for 8 hours a day like I am.
All right, great. Now we're going to move on to interviews and giving interviews with the press. Okay, so the first thing to know about interviews is that you should practice in advance. One of the things that I will often do before I know I'm going to have an interview is actually write out a couple one-sentence statements that is the core messages that I want to convey. So think of your top 3 things that you want to say. Also be prepared and write out answers to tough questions that you anticipate. The more you write it out in advance, the more likely you are to give a succinct answer that is on message. So get ready to have your money quote. There's money quote is the thing that you're trying to get quoted on, right? So make sure that you have something short, pithy, catchy that gets to the heart of what you're trying to say. Make sure that you stress the desired outcome and repeat the ask of your action. So you want to make it very clear in every single quote that you give, backs up the message of your campaign or your action. Try your best not to ramble. I remember the first media interview I ever did. I was horrified to read it in a local paper after it had all my no's, you know, yeah. So you can learn that lesson the hard way like I did, or you can learn from the mistakes that I made as a young pup and do your best, try not to ramble. It's okay to stop. If someone asks you a question and you have a short answer, give them the short answer. And then it's fine to stop. It's also fine to take a moment to catch your breath when you're asked a question. You do not need to respond right away. So, you know, if someone asks you that tough question, stop, pause, consider what you want to say and respond. Another great tip for interviews is to answer the question you want to answer, right? Not the question the reporter asked. So you might be asked, for example, to go back to the mansion action. Well, wouldn't you say that the incorrect framing in the media right now is that, oh, well, if we don't accommodate people who oppose abortion, the left can never win elections again. And first of all, there's no data to back that up, but it's also not a helpful conversation to have because this is not about personal beliefs, this is about policy. So in that question, if I was asked that question, I'd be ready to say, you know what, this is really about standing up for right and wrong, and what we need is for Senator Manchin and all people within the left to make clear that there is no room for anti-abortion terrorism in the Big Ten. We believe the Big Ten is wrong, and we believe at a minimum we should be able to agree that anti-abortion terrorism isn't welcome. Be aware that nothing is off the record. You could be speaking off the record or on background with a reporter, but be aware that when you share something, you've shared it. So be very deliberate. If you have sensitive information that you're not clear if you want to share, think about that first. Again, that's another reason to practice, to write out your answers. And then corrections. If you are misquoted, reach out and ask for a correction. This is something that's important. Especially other times you may find that another common mistake is actually not your quote, but it'll misattribute who you are, right? And so that a publication might give you a leadership role you don't have or identify you with an organization you don't represent. Don't hesitate to go back and correct them. And then one final pro tip that I will put out for interviews when we're talking about audio. So one recommendation that I have that's really helpful and makes a huge difference is if you're doing a radio interview, stand up. You will sound so much more powerful when you stand up. You're more likely, assemble that stance as if you're speaking to a room. The power in your voice will actually carry you not just to sound more confident, but it will actually lead the substance of your answers to be stronger. So I recommend that. And then if you're going to be doing something on camera, what I recommend is wearing a bright color and not a busy pattern, which can often get jarring to look at on a screen, and it distracts from your message. So with that, that's the end of our prepared content. I notice up front that at this point, feel free to chat any questions you have in the chat box. I noticed that questions up to this point are not specific to the presentation, but rather are how you can get involved. And this is the point where I can tell you, if you're interested in taking direct action in your community and supporting the fight for full reproductive health rights and justice in the United States, please, the most effective thing you can do is sign up for alerts at www.reproaction.org and to follow us on social media at we are Reproaction on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We send out regular training opportunities as well as action opportunities. So if you're interested in taking principled direct action near you, the #1 recommendation that I have is to stay connected with us for more opportunities. And then I also want to encourage everyone to save the date for our next Act and Learn webinar. We run these every single month. They are always free of charge and open to the public. The purpose of these webinars is to do training, to provide education, to dig deeper into topics, to provide a platform for activists to talk about what's working and what's not. Next month will be on Tuesday, July 18th, and we're going to cover how race culture is a reproductive justice issue. So that'll be a really special webinar, and we hope that you will join us. And with that, I will pass it to Pamela to moderate any questions that we have.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, Erin. So we do have a question. So this one's from Corey. This one makes me super happy because I love organizing on college campuses. That's where I got my organizing start. So any specific advice for students who are organizing on college campuses? Specific advice about communications. Erin, you want to take a first try at that?
Sure, I'm absolutely happy to. So I also love organizing on college campuses. It's something I do, and actually I continue to do so as an alum of Georgetown University, where I love to back up Hoyas for Choice as they do their activism on campus. So in terms of specific advice for students organizing on college campuses, a couple things. So just generally about the field of organizing, I'm going to talk about organizing in general, and then I'm going to talk about communications in specific. In terms of organizing in general, I find it really helpful to identify allies in the faculty, someone who's going to be on campus year-round, and make sure that you have age diversity within your group. You do not want all of your leadership to be seniors, and that's it. You want to make sure that you have juniors in leadership. You want to make sure that you have sophomores and freshmen represented so that there's continuity from year to year, because oftentimes, as with a mentee that I was recently working with who was working on Georgetown University's sexual assault response and policies within the administration, things will take more than one school year. So you want to make sure you have continuity. But specific to communications, a couple things. One thing that's great about organizing on a college campus is it's really easy to get op-eds placed in campus publications. So people in your group should absolutely write op-eds about your issue. They should freely and liberally do event advisories and news releases, because you can get great coverage in your campus news. Don't just limit yourself to your campus newspaper, your campus radio station. Ask if you can guest host a show on your topic, right? Also think about your news magazines and literary magazines or other places. And then another specific piece of advice that I have for students organizing on college campuses is also on a communications realm, is to know who your friendly alums are and make sure that they're plugged in on your actions as well, for a couple of reasons. One, you can get donations and visibility from them, especially when you have graduates of the university who are also activists. They likely have a whole other network that they can draw in, and they can also introduce you to other reporters in larger publications off campus, which is something that I have personally done working with Hoyas for Choice. I've connected them to Washington Post reporters that I already had a relationship with. So know that there are people who back you up, who have graduated and who have gone on in those who continue in activism. Those are really valuable contacts to have from a communications perspective. And then absolutely have your hashtag, and again, make sure that it's not just people on campus, but the people who support you off campus, alums and other interested people in the community are using it as well.
Great stuff, Erin. And so I'll just add, Corey, that, and everybody, that one of the big takeaways I noticed from student organizing that took place both in St. Louis, there was great organizing that took place at St. Louis University around the movement for Black Lives after the murder of Michael Brown, and also in Columbia, Missouri, at the University of Missouri at Columbia, where they had a prolonged, awesome movement that was part of kind of kicked off, but was also part of a lot of campus organizing that took place to fight against oppression and racial oppression, but also reproductive oppression. One of the things I really noticed is that it was so important to lift it up outside of the press in that turf. So in Columbia, for example, you have a lot of reporters who are very fond of the university and are actually alums. So that can sometimes work against you when they're a little cautious about covering something that's not so flattering about the university. So I think it was really powerful and very important to that student organizing that they were able to use social media to expand coverage and kind of apply that pressure down to Missouri and local press to get onto the story and to see it outside of the limited frame of their own personal experience as students at the university. So I think that that can be a really powerful tool, but it's also something you want to build into your social media planning. So thank you for your question. So I wanted to respond to, thank you very much, a comment by Carolina, who brought something up that I think a lot of people experience, that she does this work, but hasn't necessarily had specific training. So, I definitely think we do trainings like this. You can also reach out to Erin or myself if you are interested in doing a training specific to your organization. We do also do those trainings and can really drill down into helping you build a strategy both for direct action but also for communication. So thank you. Cassandra has a question. How do I find other activists and how do I integrate into potentially established activist networks? That's a great question, actually, and that's a communications question. So I think one of the big things that I've noticed is that basically every community kind of has a hub. If it's a coffee shop, if you're in a small town, or it might be a website that shares a lot of different information, but you want to go onto social media and kind of look at who's doing action in your turf and see what they're using and what hashtags they're reflecting, who they're retweeting. You got to kind of do a little research, but I definitely think that finding activists is something that you can do on Facebook or on Twitter. Once you identify who, at least one organization, you can kind of see who they're communicating with, and then that'll extend out to the network. Erin, you have any advice on that?
No, I think your advice is great, Pamela.
Thank you. Let's see. So there's a question from Lauren. It's actually an interesting resource, but maybe helpful for the person who asked that question. So I think that's Carolina. But that they have action hotlines that can support student organizers, and so that it's a good idea to kind of look through for those kind of resources. So I'm going to actually share this, but I haven't looked at this, but specific to gender-based violence, but might be relevant for other fields as well, is Breakthrough TV, No More Organizing Guide. So so if you're interested in finding out more about student organizing, Lauren wanted to recommend that. So I'm not seeing any other questions. So if you do have, we're coming up right on 7. So we are super into being prompt and ending on time because we respect everybody's time. So Erin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I want to thank everyone for their engagement on this training, and feel free to reach out to us at any time. As Pamela said, training is a huge component of what we do at Reproaction. We want to help create a culture of direct action within the entire movement, and we want you to be successful. So we're here.
Thanks so much. Everybody have a fantastic rest of your evening and week.
Thank you. Bye.